Hello, everybody. Scott Golden here with the Golden Opportunities Coaching YouTube channel. Welcome to those of you who are new. Please subscribe, like, comment below if there's an audio you'd like to hear. We like to do as much as we can for you. Over 360 audios available for you now, and we are endeavoring to give you the most comprehensive audio collection of self-help coaching and other useful topics for you over the next several years. But we'd like to also donate to charity. We need 1,000 subscribers to be able to do that effectively. And so um, today we're going to talk about relationship killers, 10 issues that will automatically contribute to the killing or ending of a relationship, perhaps prematurely. So the first is ignoring issues. So obviously every relationship, or almost every relationship, is going to have issues. You might get lucky and be in one of the ones that don't. But for the most part, people have communication challenges and expectations that are undermet. And so oftentimes couples have issues with expectations and needs portfolio and communication styles and affection styles, attachment styles, and all sorts of other fun things. And ignoring the issues at the core, wanting different things out of life, viewing how the relationship should be or could be different, can cause challenges. Now, a lot of times what happens is we say we'll talk about things later and we never do, or we don't know how to find solutions where we can agree to disagree or compromise in a way where both parties feel like they're at least heard and respected, and so that will cause challenge. Not focusing on the relationship itself. So relationships takes maintenance. I hate when people say that they take work because in my life as a relationship coach, the one thing I will say is yes, working on a relationship in terms of counteracting each other and kind of being there for each other is important. But really, they take maintenance. Putting the time into making sure the relationship is in a healthy, progressive, positive state is necessary, but that shouldn't feel like work. If you're truly invested in the person you're with and you feel they're invested in you, it should be a joy because it's bonding you closer. And so, when you're not focused on growing the relationship, it will slowly begin to die. Defensiveness in a relationship can cause many challenges, especially when you consider that defensiveness is most often based in assumption, and assumption causes pain because people assume lots of things about each other without really understanding each other or understanding where the other person is coming from. When defensiveness becomes part of the relationship, that means there's an unhealed trauma in the way in which the two parties have related in the past, and without the healing of that core trauma or a retelling of a new story around that trauma, moving forward in the relationship will become exceptionally difficult, if not nearly impossible. Another thing to consider is being overly critical of each other. Now, criticism is a form of control. That is, if I'm critical of you or you are critical of me, you're hoping that by being critical, my behavior will change. Therefore, you're trying to alter me to fit the needs that you have in a way that isn't natural for me. So at the end of the day, what happens when we're overly critical is that we may be able to inspire some form of short-term short-term change. Sorry about that. Short-term change, but it doesn't last because the person being criticized is only making the decision on the basis of trying to end the conflict, and they're not actually committing to the process of making things different for the sake of the relationship. So finding a way to compromise is far better than criticize. Compromise always better than criticize. The next is idealization of a person. So look, every person that we're going to be involved with romantically and platonically, but specifically here romantically, is going to have challenges and flaws. And so when we idealize a person, it is to say that we look past their flaws. In reality, when we're looking at compatibility for the long term, that is lasting years or decades, we need to be able to accept our partner's flaws and not idealize them. Looking back, I can honestly say in two of my longer term relationships, I did idealize partners, and both of those relationships ended in great part because of that situation. Now, when we look at the past and we see our relationships objectively, we can see that we have idealized people quite a bit. but in the action of doing it, we think we're being gracious to them. But when resentment starts to develop for the way a person behaves, that idealization begins to go away, and then the need to confront the reality is there. The next is ignoring a person's past. Look, if a person has an addiction past, if a person has a past of being verbally aggressive or physically aggressive, or they have a past of being lazy, or they have past of traits that we don't like, ignoring it doesn't make it go away. As a matter of fact, most often we ignore things because we don't want to deal with them or don't know how to deal with them. But the problem becomes if we're ignoring them from a place of not knowing how to deal with them, that's one thing. If we're ignoring them from the place of being unwilling to deal with them, that's an entirely different challenge, which ultimately leads to a lot of problems because without finding solutions that work for both people and that both parties in a relationship are committed to, there is no way to move forward on a consistent basis. The other aspect, and this is probably the most common single thing that I see in relationship work with the work that I do with people. And by the way, if you're in a new relationship or in a relationship that's struggling, you can reach out through the website here on the About Me page here on YouTube or at PO Perception on Twitter. And I work with couples all the time and people coming out of relationships and setting new standards for themselves. But over promising, that is probably the single biggest thing that's dangerous. So a lot of times overpromising happens because societal perception tells us what we should want in a relationship, whether that's something like children, which many people don't want, but they don't know how to articulate that, whether that be marriage, again, something that many people are shying away from. Matter of fact, I am of the personal belief after working with thousands of couples that marriage will have faded probably within about 2 or 3 generations, except among religious people. It's just the way that human nature is developing. Marriage, at least in Western culture, is less important, or overpromising the amount of time spent, or overpromising certain favors financially, emotionally, sexually, whatever the case may be. The act of overpromising to avoid conflict is probably the single biggest relationship killer that's there because when you promise something and you break it once, you might find forgiveness. When you break it twice, you're going to find resistance. By the time you're breaking it 3, 4, and 5 times, you're finding resentment, and overcoming and recovering from that can be extremely difficult. The next is competition. So, friendly competition and pushing a person to be the best they can be is great, but competition where I'm going to do better than you, or I'm going to make more money than you, or I'm going to do something you can't do better than you, and having that in a relationship can be extremely negative and toxic to the foundation of the relationship, but also to the self-esteem of both parties. The person who is successful in winning a competition becomes overly cocky or smug. The person who loses, they lose self-esteem, and so competition has no place in relationships unless it's, just a healthy challenge, kind of joking and light. But real competition can often be, and most often is, a relationship killer. Of course, then we could get into other audios such that competition is an illusion in and of itself, but that's a completely different topic, one that I have done audios on and mentioned, but I'll probably do a longer form audio on it at some point. The next is shame or guilt. So making a person feel guilty or allowing yourself to manipulate words in a manner that brings about feelings of guilt in another person, while it may give leverage in the short run and may actually be extremely momentarily beneficial because you got your desired response or reaction from the other person, when guilt or shame is part of the way that two people relate to each other, eventually the person who's always feeling guilty or is feeling like they can never do anything right is going to resent that and pull away, emotionally shut down, and create more hardships in the relationship. The last thing is the expectation too much. And I often say to people, and it's hard for lots of people to understand because we live in a very expectant society, but expectation is the root cause of a lot of failure. When you put heavy expectations on a person, eventually they are going to fall short. They're not going to see the world the way you do at all times. And so, therefore, expectation is a root cause of a lot of failure. when we put loose expectations such as just honesty or just communication, and we keep them wide, and the belief is we can work through anything together as a unit, as a couple, then we're in a healthy dynamic. But at the end of the day, if you're expecting a person to be your solution or whatever the case may be, there will be resentment that comes with that. In any event, I encourage you, keep your feet on the ground, your mind in the moment. Until next time, everybody.